Thank you all for being here this morning as we discuss this section from the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is a section in which, as some of us have been following along, we may recall this is Lord Vamandev, who's appeared at the behest of Aditi, who's a great devotee, and traditionally considered the mother of the Devatas. And she was in such an aggrieved position. And from that place of feeling that great pain, that suffering, that loss, that her children, the Devatas, had lost everything, she had lost everything, she, under the guidance of her husband, under his advice, his guidance, she performed this worship to have Lord Vishnu appear as her son in the form of Vamandev. And so the Lord has appeared, and now he is speaking to Bali Maharaj. And it's a very sweet connection because he's recognizing Bali Maharaj has these natural devotional qualities. And so Vaman Dev is reciprocating with them, and he's speaking to him, and he's glorifying actually Bali Maharaj's whole lineage, which is interesting because Bali Maharaj's lineage is a lineage of asuras. But even in this telling, Vaman Dev is retelling in brief the story of the Lord's defeating Hiranyaksha and then eventually Hiranyakashipu, and of course the glories of Prahlad Maharaj, who are all in the dynasty of Bali Maharaj. But even in explaining or in retelling the story of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, if you notice here, Vamandev is telling a kind of a very sweetened version of the story, where he's glorifying Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu's kind of prowess, their strength, their courage, and at the same time also indirectly, subtly indicating that the Lord's action of defeating them in battle and eventually of slaying them was also an act of love. It was also something that the Lord did out of his great compassion. Here Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport about Lord Vishnu's, it's not that Lord Vishnu was afraid of Hiranyakashipu, it was that Lord Vishnu, in this form of Varahadev, was feeling great compassion for this soul, and was very eager and anxious to, through this pastime, to deliver this soul. Srila Prabhupada, there's two verses, verse 9 and 10 here, that both make explicit reference to the Lord entering into the body and specifically into the heart of Hiranyakashipu. And Srila Prabhupada picks up on this, and in the purport he speaks about this idea of the Lord's ability, of Krishna or Lord Vishnu's ability to enter into the heart. And he cites this verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Maybe Gorsharan Prabhu, you can put this verse into the chat box. But he cites this very kind of popular or famous verse from the 18th chapter of the Gita. It's one of the concluding verses of the Gita, actually. Just a few verses before Krishna gives his ultimate instruction and conclusion of the Gita, of the Sarva Dharman Parityaja verse. Just a few verses before that, he reminds Arjuna and he reminds us of his position within the heart of every being. And Srila Prabhupada cites this verse, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridde sherjana tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. That this is Krishna speaking, and he's saying Ishvara himself, but he's referring here in the third person. He says, Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, is situated in everyone's heart. Hrit deshe, in the desha, the realm, the world of Hrit, of the heart. And he says, is directing the wanderings of all living entities. Brahmayan, Srila Prabhupada translates as causing to travel, and then in the word for word in the verse he says directing, um, who only his devotees? No, sarva bhutani, all living entities. And then he says something. Krishna says something very interesting. He says yantra arudhani, which means um, who are situated, who are placed as if yantra, on a machine, or a vehicle. We might say yantra is a vehicle. We might even say car. So in this, who are all these living entities, as if they're situated in the body, as if the body is a vehicle, as if it's a yantra, the machine, and they're wandering around everywhere. I should say, we are wandering around everywhere in these vehicles of the bodies, or the body and mind. And Krishna is also with us. Ishvara is also with us. Ishvara is usually the name for, or the word for God, for the divine. That's especially used when in terms of yoga, in the yogis. If you look at in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, for instance, you'll find generally there won't be so much specific particular name. Patanjali doesn't really name Krishna, Govinda, Vishnu, Shiva. He doesn't say like that, but he says Ishvara Pranidhana. So Ishvara and Krishna, I think not coincidentally, uses the same term, Ishvara, here. That Ishvara is that Lord, that guide within the heart, who is directing, who's giving directions to all of us as we are navigating the world in our yantras, in our cars. So we'll come back to this idea, but I'd like to, for the remainder of our time this morning, I want to speak about this idea a little bit that Srila Prabhupada cites in this purport of how Krishna does this within the heart. And in some ways, of course, in this purport, we read, Srila Prabhupada here says that, there's nothing illogical about Krishna entering into the heart of a living being, because after all, he says in the Gita, I'm present in the heart anyways. So it's a very sweet way of looking at it, but it also, just looking at it from another angle, it raises a question. And I've heard this question asked before. Some of you may have been present more than a few months ago, I guess, during Janmashtami time. We had a Bhagavatam class. We had a series in preparation of Janmashtami, and I actually was speaking on Krishna entering the heart of Devaki, and entering the heart of Vasudeva, the mind of Vasudeva, the heart of Vasudeva, the heart of Devaki, the womb of Devaki. And then this question came up, that how is it that we speak of Krishna entering the heart when we're also told, as we are in this Gita verse, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hriddeshe, that he is already in Sarva Bhutanam Hriddeshe, in the heart of every living being. So if he's already in the heart, how can we speak of him entering the heart? Why, taking it one step further even, why is it that in the realm of Bhakti, we even pray for Krishna to enter the heart? We make that our one of our deepest prayers, is that Krishna, please manifest yourself, be present, appear within my heart, right? Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings Mama Mana Mandire, that he's saying, of course, he uses the word man, which can be alternately translated as mind or heart, seat of consciousness. But often it's considered, he's saying, the temple of the heart, I will enshrine you, O Krishna, in the temple of my heart. So how can we speak of enshrining Krishna, inviting Krishna, welcoming Krishna, praying for Krishna to enter the heart, if he's already there? So I'd like to explore this idea a little bit. And first I want to just note that when we really speak about Krishna being in the heart, when we speak about Ishvara being in the heart, when we speak about, more generally, we can even say kind of, the divine divinity within the heart, Um, we can understand this in three ways. Actually, whenever we speak about Krishna, about the divine, according to the Bhagavatam, what we're really doing is we're speaking about um, one absolute truth who can be understood generally in three ways. And we have this verse that this very foundational verse that's in the first canto, the second chapter, 1 to 11, if you want to follow along, um, where Shukadev Goswami um, makes it clear that what's being spoken of in the Bhagavatam, this absolute truth that's being spoken of, um, is one non-dual substance that is known in three ways. Vadanti tat tadva vidhas tatvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabhyate. That those who are the tattva vidha, the learned souls, they say vadanti, they say like this: tattvam, the absolute truth, which is advayam, non-dual, one. Brahma iti is known as Brahman. Paramatmeti is also known as Paramatma. Bhagavan iti, and is known as Bhagavan. So this is the, in one sense, foundational understanding that the same one Lord can be known in these three features: as Brahman, as Paramatma, and as Bhagavan. And in these three features, we can understand that Krishna is present, the Lord is present, this one Advayam is present in the heart. We can understand this in three ways. In the feature of Brahman, we can understand that he is present in the heart because he's present everywhere. Brahman is that feature which often in the community of bhaktas we don't talk about so much. There's a kind of a hesitance sometimes to speak about this because it's not so exciting to us, it's not so attractive to us, and also because um, other schools, the Advaitin traditions, they put so much emphasis on this that sometimes we're a little worried about talking about it too much because then we want to differentiate ourselves. I know that's, but actually this is part of our tradition also. It's not that we deny that Krishna has a feature of Brahman. Um, where we differ with the Advaitins is in saying that that is one feature, but actually that's just one aspect. There are these two other aspects, and that one aspect is not the end of the discussion. It's the beginning of the discussion. So anyway, this is, I don't want to get into the differences, um, but as part of our own understanding, we can also appreciate that in this feature of Brahman, the Lord is present everywhere. And if the Lord is present everywhere, that means that includes in our hearts. That includes animating our bodies, running through our bodies, our minds, our power of discernment and discrimination, our buddhi. If the Lord is present in, certainly in the natural world and in the world around us, then it would reason that how can he not also be present in the hearts of all beings? So in that sense, as Brahman, Krishna is present everywhere, and so he is present in the heart already. More specifically, in the feature of Paramatma, Krishna is present within the heart in a very special way. So that same Advayam, that same non-dual one supreme absolute truth, that one tattva, param satya, param tattva, that one tattva, um, who is Brahman, is also present by his grace, by his sweet will. He makes himself present and accessible to all of us within the hearts in a very special way as Paramatma. The Upanishadic kind of analogy for this very famous analogy that I believe is found in two of the Upanishads. A version of it is found in the Mundaka Upanishad as well as in a text called the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. The analogy is of two birds sitting in the same tree. That there are two birds sitting in the same tree, on the same branch of the same tree, in fact. And one bird, who the analogy tells us is like the Jivatma, is simply attracted to eating the fruits of this tree, the berries of this tree, looking for the sweet berries and trying to avoid the bitter or sour berries of the tree. And of course, on this tree, in this analogy, these two berries, they look almost identical. So this bird is very much, this Jivatma bird is very much focused on uh, finding the sweet berries and avoiding the bitter ones. But there's a second bird, and the commentaries to this analogy tell us that this second bird is understood generally to be Paramatma. And Paramatma is seated there. Paramatma's nature is Atmarama. So he's satisfied. The second bird is satisfied. He's not searching for this and that berry. What is he doing or she doing? What are they doing? They're simply waiting for this other bird, this first bird, the Jivatma bird, to turn. We have, thank you for sharing in the chat, we have this description. Although the two birds are in the same tree, the eating bird is fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness as the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way or other he turns his face to his friend, the Lord, and knows his glories, at once the suffering bird becomes free from all anxieties. So this is the understanding that as the Jivatma, we are so fixated on sukha and dukkha, on punya and pap, on these dualities of pleasure and pain, that we become so anxious, we become so engrossed, as Srila Prabhupada describes here, that we forget we're not alone in that tree, that there is an eternal companion with us. And that eternal companion is Paramatma. Now, it's interesting, in this analogy, Paramatma is seated patiently, waiting for the Jivatma to turn back to Paramatma. And so generally in the process of yoga, especially in dhyana yoga or ashtanga yoga, the idea is that the Jivatma can tune back in to the Paramatma and receive that connection, receive that guidance from the Paramatma. So in this sense, very much the Lord is in the heart, is present in the heart, but is just kind of quietly waiting within the heart for us to turn back to him. And what is his function, his role in the heart? And we'll talk a little bit more about this. His role, his function is to give us guidance. So that is the Lord within the heart as Paramatma. But there's this third feature of Bhagavan. And in this third feature, the Lord is present within the heart, not just in the way that the Lord is present everywhere and in everything, not just present in the way that the Lord is present as Paramatma, as the dutiful guide who's patiently waiting for us to turn to him and to hear his guidance. But the Lord can be present, and this is where the practice of bhakti really comes in. This is where our prayers come in. This is where we appeal to the Lord to be present in our hearts in this way. As Bhagavan, the Lord is present as our dearmost friend. The Lord is present as our most precious beloved. The Lord can be present within the heart in a dynamic relationship. So it's in some ways similar to Paramatma, but where there is a maybe slight difference, we can say, is there's the connection is one of a deep love and a deep loving relationship. And so in that sense, the Lord is present in the heart if we choose to invite the Lord to be present in the heart, if we awaken to the Lord's presence within the heart in Bhagavan, in this Bhagavan feature as our dearmost friend. There's an analogy that I'd like to share. I know we're arriving sort of towards the end of our time, perhaps. But there's an analogy, an extended analogy that I wanted to share that I think really helps to maybe, I hope, helps to shed some light on um, the way we can understand these three features and how the Lord gives us guidance through these three features. And I was thinking about this analogy because, looking at this beautiful verse in the 18th chapter, it's such a striking image, isn't it, of um, the Lord's compassion and kindness for us, that in the heart of every living being, as we are, and I think of this in terms of, this very visual image that Krishna gives us in this. This is one of Krishna's original analogies. We're a tradition of analogies. So it's often the acharyas, the commentators, and then we'll expand on them and give our own analogies in classes. But this is one of Krishna's analogies. That Krishna says, just like there's a vehicle, there's a yantra that's wandering around, that's navigating around. In the same way, we are navigating around in these yantras of the body and the mind. And I am present. Ishvara is present, also guiding. So this got me thinking about this analogy of Krishna guiding us from within in these three different ways. So imagine that you are going on a trip. Imagine that, for instance, let's see who I can see on my screen here. Gaur Kumar Prabhu is going on a trip. And let's say he's driving from New York to West Virginia, to New Vrindavan. So he's going on this trip. He needs guidance. So one thing that he can do to give him some guidance to get to his destination is he can consult with a map. He can use a map, right? Some of us, we might be more comfortable with maps. Some of us are less comfortable with maps. So what is a map? A map, it lays out the entire territory. It gives you an expansive view. And from that expansive view, if Gaur Kumar Prabhu consults that map, he can chart out his course, right? He can look at a map. Now, it's not that Gaur Kumar Prabhu is going to find a particular specific map that's going to say, this is the map from, Brooklyn, New York to Moundsville, West Virginia. He's going to find a map that is maybe a map of the United States as a whole, or maybe a map of like the eastern seaboard, the east coast of the US. And he will find on that map where he is and where he's going, and he will chart a course. And so I'd like us to think about kind of the guidance that we get from Krishna within the heart in this Brahman feature, kind of like that map, that Brahman is present everywhere. And so if Brahman is present everywhere, then if we can learn to recognize him, if we can learn or not even him, we can say it, if we can learn to recognize that all pervasive divine presence and energy, if we can learn to recognize it, then that is a way of tapping into guidance. Then we can chart out our course. But the thing with maps is a couple of things. One, they're very difficult to read. They're very difficult. You have to have a certain skill to do that, right? So Gaur Kumar Prabhu in this example, let's say he's very skilled at reading maps and charting out a course, things are going to go well for him. But if Gail maybe is not so skilled in reading the map, she may have the same map, but she may not be able to access it in the same way. And so in an analogous way, this Brahman realization, like in the 12th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, yes, those who set their practice and their mind to contemplation or meditation on me in this feature of Brahman, they also do arrive at the destination eventually. But it's a very difficult, arduous process. He says it's filled with klesha, it's filled with difficulty, with challenge. It's not an easy thing. And in fact, it relies on so much on our efforts. So with Brahman realization, often Brahman realization is paired to the practice of jnana, jnana and vairagya. And with jnana and vairagya, jnanis, vairagis, they have to be so um, strong and staunch and strict in their practice. And not just strict, but it's so much depending on my skill, my practice of meditation, my practice of detachment, right? Um, and if I deviate from that, if I fall from that, then it can be a very, very perilous situation. Um, Maybe it's not so nice to share, but anyway, I won't say his name. But many, many years ago, there was one devotee, one god brother of mine, who was serving as Radhanath Swami's personal servant or his assistant when he was in the States. And among his other duties, he was driving Maharaj. So I think they were driving from maybe like from Chicago to Gitanagari or something like that, or maybe to New Vrindavan, in fact. And somehow or other, he wasn't so familiar with the route, and this is years ago. Somehow or other, he read the map wrong, and he ended up driving. It was just he and Radhanath Maharaj, and he ended up driving Maharaj. I think they drove like 4 or 5 hours in the opposite direction of where they were supposed to go because he just read the map completely wrong. And so instead of, going for, 4 hours on, in east, he went west or something like that, and they were just completely off course. It threw off everything. I think Maharaj missed it, like a speaking engagement or something like that, and it was like this really heavy situation. I remember that the godbrother of mine who was just like devastated for months after that. He was just like inconsolable because it was such a failure on his part. He caused such a kind of a blunder. But this is the thing with maps. But then something very interesting happened in the early 2000s, late 1990s and early 2000s. We started getting these GPS things, which it seems funny now because now everyone has this. It's like in all of our phones, and it's so ubiquitous, so common. But I remember in the early 2000s, maybe it was even the late 90s. I think the early adopters got it in the late 90s. You started to see a couple of people actually, and I will say his name for this one, another god brother, Yashoda Dulal Prabhu, I think was like the first person I knew who had a GPS. It was quite a thing. When I met Yashoda Dolapu years ago, some of know him quite well. Um, he was like a car aficionado, and he was like one of these people that he had always had the latest gadgets. He was always like had to have the latest gadgets, and so he was the first person I think that we knew that had this GPS. And in fact, he also drove Radhanath Maharaj, and he used the GPS, perhaps learning from this other devotee's experience. And it was funny because you can hear some of these old classes if you can find them. Some of you may remember. But Radhanath Maharaj would always cite this, he would always use this GPS as an example in his classes because it was such an unusual thing. In fact, Radhanath Maharaj, he gave a name to this. He called her, he used to call it, I think he would call it Gopika Priya Sundari, so GPS. And he would say, "Oh yes, we arrived because of Gopika Priya Sundari Mataji. She brought us like that." But it was such an unusual thing because Yashodalal was practically the only person we knew that had this technology in his car. Um, but anyway, this GPS. So what is a GPS? In one sense, it's the same thing as the map, but it's more particularized. It's more specific. If Gaur Kumar Prabhu has the GPS, now he has the power of the map, the expansiveness of the map, but he has it in one specific place that he can enter in. My destination is, Moundsville, West Virginia, so and so, McCreary Ridge or whatever, Palace Road. He can enter it in. And now what will the GPS do? It will give him step-by-step guidance. So in a similar way, Paramatma, just as Brahman is all pervasive, Paramatma is that localized representative, that specific. It's the same Brahman, it's the same divine substance, but now specific to me, specific to Gaur Kumar, specific to Raj and to Daniel and to Kula Pradeep and to Gail and to all of us. There is that Paramatma within each of our hearts, guiding us, giving us our own particular route. Um, and what is so amazing about the GPS is what happens when we follow the guidance, where we go and we get closer to our destination. But when we don't follow that guidance, what does the GPS do? It just recalculates. It doesn't blame us. It doesn't judge us. It doesn't stop working. Sometimes I think if I follow the GPS, if I, after a while, if I keep ignoring it, will it reach a point where it just gets fed up with me and it just says like, like I quit? And it doesn't. It, of course, assuming that it's functioning properly and everything. But the GPS, what it does is it constantly keeps recalculating from wherever you are. And if that means making a U-turn, it'll just tell you, right? My GPS, or now it's on my phone, but my like Google Maps or whatever, Siri, they'll just at a certain point, it may just say like make a U-turn when possible. Make a U-turn in, whatever, a quarter of a mile. It'll keep telling, even if we're going in the exact opposite wrong direction, like unfortunately happened with this brahmachari, it will just get us to reroute. Um, so that's a wonderful thing. Um, but it also requires something. It requires us to tune in to that voice of guidance coming from the GPS. If the car is very noisy, if we've got the GPS going but we're ignoring it, and we've got the stereo on very loud, or we're doing something else, we're distracted. The GPS will be giving its instructions, but we won't really be taking full advantage of those instructions. And so in a similar way, Paramatma is there, but if our lives are so noisy, if our minds are noisy with mental chatter, if our lives are noisy with the influences of rajas and tamas, um, the guidance is being given, but it's like the GPS that's speaking, but it's too noisy in the car to hear it. So it's one of the reasons why, especially in all yoga paths, but especially in the path of dhyana yoga, or Ashtanga yoga or Raja yoga, where so much of the focus, the goal is to connect to Paramatma. This is the goal, Srila Prabhupada says, of the yogis. And here yogi means really Ashtanga yogi. The goal of the yogis is Paramatma, is connecting to Paramatma. And so um, that requires a certain kind of quieting of the mind. That requires us to still yogas chitta vritti nirodha, to still the fluctuations of vrittis of the manas, so that we can connect to the voice of Paramatma. But now imagine that Gorkumar. Okay, so we talked about him using the map, we talked about him using the GPS, but what if instead of just the map, just the GPS, Gorkumar had seated in the car next to him, he had Nitya, right? Or he had Gorsharan Prabhu. What if he had along with him for that journey, not just a guide in the sense of the GPS, but a guide who is his dear, well-wishing friend as well? So now Gorkumar Prabhu is driving and the exit is coming up, but maybe it's a little noisy or maybe he's distracted. He's going to miss the exit. So now not only does the GPS will tell him to take the exit, but if he misses the exit, GPS will just recalculate. But what can Gorsharan Prabhu do? What can Nitya do? What can his friend do seated next to Gorkumar Prabhu that the GPS won't do or can't do? What the friend can do is the friend can say, "Hey, Gorkumar, you're going to miss the exit. Look over there." His friend can tap him on his shoulder and say, "Hey, Prabhu, you need to pay attention. You're going to miss the exit." If he's falling asleep, the GPS is not. I don't think they've designed a GPS to do that yet. If he's falling asleep, as unfortunately sometimes happens to us if we get sleepy, the GPS is not going to necessarily be able to wake him up, but his dear friend will, or his partner, his wife will, right? And so it's not a perfect analogy, but what if we could take it from the map to the GPS to a friend, a personal relationship, someone who's willing to sit there in the journey with us, not just giving us um, instructions and guidance and giving us a route sort of mechanically or formally, which is wonderful itself. But what if it can be even more personal? What if that guidance can come with someone who gives not just guidance, but encouragement, who wakes us up when we're sleepy, who catches us when we're about to go and make a wrong turn, and rather than just recalculates, who tries to correct us from making the wrong turn in the begin, to begin with. That is Bhagavan. And so when we pray for Krishna to appear within our hearts, um, when we pray for Krishna, as it's stated here, Jai Shri Shri Radha Muralidhar Gaurachandra Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. When we pray for Krishna to appear in our hearts, just like Radha Muralidhar appear with the curtains opening to give their darshan to us, it's like asking Krishna to be personally present in the car, not just as a GPS, not just in the gift of a map that can help us, but in that personal way as our ever well-wishing, dear most beloved friend who never ignores us, who never forgets about us, who has, as Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport that we read today, who has so much anxiety and care for us that he's just eager to appear within our hearts. It's not that we have to convince him and we have to drag him there. He's eager to appear within our hearts if only we'll invite him. So I don't want to take too much time, and we have the darshan as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you all so much. I hope this analogy was helpful, and it gives us, especially at this time of year of Kartik, it's such an amazing time to really be intentional. If we are inspired to pray for Krishna to appear in our hearts in this very, very sweet way. What does the poet say? Idam, what is that? Idam te
Apurnatha Gopala Balam.
Gopala Balam, Sadame Manashya Virastam, Kim Anye. Kim Anye, what else can I ask for? What else is there than Sada, for always, Mana Avirastam, for you to be present in my heart in this way. So we can use this opportunity of Karthik to pray like this for Krishna to be present in our hearts in this really sweet, intimate, personal way. Thank you so much.